Let's go to the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Phillies, man. Got the hot stove heating up on the day when it's a little chilly for the first time out there, a little wet and rainy and cold. Scott Lauber from the Inquirer is set to join us to talk a little bit more. As Scott, we think the Phillies, they got their manager in place, and now we think that they are going to really try to get him some new toys. Is that the feeling that we get? Last year we got stupid money. What kind of money are we going to get this year?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to figure out. How stupid is it going to be? I do. I think that they're going to have another active offseason like they did last winter. You think about it now, and after 81 and 81, it doesn't. It sort of dulls what they did last winter. But you think about a year ago, and right around this time, they were a couple of weeks away from making the Gene Segura trade, and then they signed Andrew McCutchen, and they signed David Robertson, and then, of course, in spring training, they signed Bryce Harper. Right before spring training, they made the trade for Real Muto. So they did a lot of reshaping to their roster last winter. They built what they think is their core of their team. And I think this winter what you're going to see is you're going to see them focus quite a bit on pitching, both starting pitching and the bullpen, and then fill in around the edges. Maybe they'll look to add a backup catcher. Maybe they'll look to add depth in various places. They certainly need to address third base one way or another. So they have needs other than pitching, but pitching is going to be their focus all winter long. And I think you're going to see them acquire not one but two starters, and then depth behind that. And I think you're going to see them try to remake their entire bullpen, which I'm looking forward to seeing how they do that, because we all know that acquiring relievers from year to year is it's a dicey proposition, and they've had some tough luck with guys like Hunter and Ishak and Robertson the last 2 years, 3 years. So I am curious to see what they do there, but I think pitching is going to be their major focus over the next couple of months.
All right, let's get into the how part of the equation that you mentioned here, Scott. Because I believe I've heard Matt Klentak say a couple of times that they value draft picks. They don't want to be spending on free agents and losing those picks. So what means and what players do you see them looking to acquire, and how?
Yeah, I heard that comment last week too, Jeff, and I think that the way I interpret that is, in a perfect world, in an ideal offseason, no, they would prefer not to give up draft picks for signing qualified free agents. But this is not that world. I don't really know how they can affect meaningful change to their rotation without signing one of the big pitchers, whether it's, Cole or Strasburg. I happen to think maybe a guy like Zach Wheeler is a more realistic target. Madison Bumgarner, who I think is going to go elsewhere, but I'm sure that the Phillies will look into that possibility. All of those guys would cost them a draft pick. And so unless they've got a trade up their sleeve, and I don't believe they have the assets in their farm system to pull off a trade for legitimate, top of the rotation guy to put with Aaron Nola, they're going to have to give up a draft pick, and there's really no way around it. They'd rather not. And I think what Klentak was trying to say was, going forward in future years, they'd rather not. That the last couple of years they have given up a draft pick, and I think the question he got asked that elicited that answer was about the farm system, and he was trying to defend the farm system and say that it's better than a lot of outsiders think, in his opinion. And I think one of the ways he was saying that was, look, the way you make it better is by hanging on to your draft pick. So, no, they'd rather not, but given the status of their rotation, I think they're going to have to, and I think they will for the right guy. I think certainly if you have a chance to sign Garrett Cole, a second-round pick next year you're not going to think twice about it. So
no, definitely not.
Now, if it's the difference between signing, like, say, Jake Odorizzi, who received a qualifying offer, and Cole Hamels, who did not, and you like Cole Hamels, and it's a one-year deal, you're going to sign Cole Hamels, and you're going to pass on Odorizzi because now the draft pick comes into play. So I think for the right guy in the right situation, they'll do it.
Scott, correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't this management group of Klentak McPhail, when they got here, talk about how you develop the arms within and you buy the bats from outside. Now it seems like A, they're not going to do that, but B, is that philosophy even sound? Because when you see the Astros playing in the World Series and all their arms were bought, and then the Yankees bought a bunch of arms, and the Nationals, I know they developed Strasburg, but Corbin is an arm that they bought. It seemed like the teams that win do buy the arms. And Scherzer, right. It seems like their philosophy from the beginning wasn't even a sound one.
Yeah, I think it's a sound philosophy. It's just really, really hard. I mean, I covered a team in the Red Sox who believe in the same thing. I think all 30 teams believe in, grow the arms because it's a whole lot less expensive if you can draft them, right? I mean, for me, that's a winning lottery ticket right there. That's a guy you drafted, you developed through your system, you brought up, he turned into a number one starter, and you sign him to a reasonable contract. So if you can do that, and you can do that with the bulk of your rotation, you're so far ahead of the game. I covered the Red Sox who set out to do that, and they didn't. The last homegrown pitcher they've had is Clay Buchholz, and that was like 2005. And so what did they have to do? They had to trade their whole farm system to get Chris Sale, and they had to go sign David Price for $217 million. And it got them a World Series in 2018, but now they're paying for it on the back end. They're going to have to trade Mookie Betts maybe because they signed the other guys. So, I think you'd love to do it the way McPhail, I think specifically the one who said, grow the arms, buy the bats. You'd love to do that. And the Phillies did it well with Aaron Nola, and they're hoping to do it again with Spencer Howard. But, I think in the meantime, their timeline to win is not really lined up with what they've got coming in their farm system. They're moving a little bit faster than their farm system is. So at this stage in their situation, they've got to go and buy a pitcher, which is not ideal. And maybe it ends up blowing up on you the way Jake Arrieta has so far. But, you'd like to think that with a guy like Garrett Cole, maybe Garrett Cole turns out to be the next Max Scherzer, and it's one of those rare free agent pitchers that you spend a fortune for, and it actually pays off.
Scott, what's the smartest way? This could be a really tough question to answer, but what's the smartest way the Phillies can go about adding these pieces that they so desperately need? You talk about the Red Sox paying for it on the back end. Like, you look at a guy like Strasburg, and he's not getting any younger, but you look at his performance in the World Series, so it's like, what guys may be not worth giving that big deal to, or is there more efficient and money-saving ways to improve the staff, improve the team, and not spend that stupid money?
Yeah, it's really so difficult to do because for every Max Scherzer who, the Nationals spent $210 million or whatever it was on him, and so far he's been worth every cent. For every Max Scherzer, there's 5, 10, 15 guys who just don't work out because signing free agent pitchers is really not smart. If you think about it, they've got tread on their arm already, and they're always one pitch away from a serious injury that's going to take them out for a while. So there's really the risk so far outweighs the reward most times. I mean, even a guy like Strasburg. So you look at him, and I think he's 31, and he certainly looks like he's reached his peak or is just reaching his peak. He just had probably the best year of his career. He's been healthy now, finally. But if you're the team that goes out and spends, let's say, somewhere between 150 and 180 million bucks over 5 or 6 years on Steven Strasburg, you're betting that all of that extra work that he did in October is not going to come back to bite you. You're betting that he's going to stay healthy for the bulk of that contract, and his history would say that he would not. So there are risks even there with a guy who, looked like he was as much of a sure thing in the postseason as there is. You're inheriting quite a bit of risk with a deal like that. So I think, you do your due diligence and you hope that you're finding a guy who's going to age well, and then you keep your fingers crossed. So I know that's what the Red Sox did with David Price. It's what the Nationals did with Max Scherzer. It's what all these teams do when they're investing, 150+ million. And for a guy like Garrett Cole, it might be closer to $300 million. He's going to want to break all sorts of records. David Price has the free agent pitching record, which is $217 million, and Cole's going to have his eye on that and then some. So, you do your due diligence. You hope you're getting a guy who's going to hold up, and then you basically hold your breath, cross your fingers, and pray.
Hey, I'll leave you with this, Scott. They non-tendered essentially the entire bullpen. So is that a spot? I don't know how many guys are actually in that bullpen that are under contract and coming back, but by proxy, is that a spot where they're going to have to spend money, or do they have guys in the organization that we don't know about that will fill those roles?
They're going to have to be creative. So whether that means spending money, making a couple of trades, maybe you can turn Cesar Hernandez into a reliever. I think that's what they're hoping for, a guy that they really would rather either, they don't want to pay him what he's going to make next year in arbitration. So the choices are either trade him, non-tender him, or bring him back and swallow that money. So and pay that money. So maybe they can make a creative trade, but it's you talk about how signing free agent pitchers in their 30s is an inexact science. Well, acquiring relievers of any type is an inexact science. They thought they had about as sure a bet as you could have last year when they signed David Robertson. He was a guy who, for 9 years in a row, had 60 or more appearances. He had never broken down. He had never been on the disabled list. And what happens? He makes 7 appearances and then needs Tommy John surgery. So if a guy like that is not going to work out for you, you're almost going to throw darts now and figure it out. Like, do you go reverse now and try to go after a guy like Dellin Betances, who broke down and had injury issues, and now you're counting on him being fixed? Who knows? So that's why I said I'm really curious to see, as the offseason unfolds, how they go about building that bullpen, because I've seen teams do it and fail spectacularly. I don't know that there is a real science to it whatsoever. I think you just, again, you try to make some educated guesses and hope it works out.
All right, Scott, real quick, before we let you roll here, I know, Jeff, you got a quick question. I want to fire this one, too. Does Josh Donaldson make sense to you? I've seen his name kind of come up from time to time.
Josh Donaldson does make sense, assuming he's looking for a short contract, and I don't want to make that assumption after the year he had. So, he had a 1-year deal with Atlanta. I'm sure he's going to look for multiple years. And the question you have to ask yourself, if you're the Phillies, whether it's Josh Donaldson or Mike Moustakas, any quality hitting third baseman not named Anthony Rendon, who we know is going to get multiple years and big money, is how close do you think Alec Boehm is? Because if you think Alec Boehm is going to be your third baseman by, the middle of next year, you're probably not going to go sign Josh Donaldson or Mike Moustakas if it's anything for more than 1 year. So that's a question that I've got to answer, and I've heard different things. I mean, I've heard, Boehm is ready to hit right now at the big league level, but third base is a bit of an adventure. I've heard people say he's an okay third baseman. To be honest with you, I haven't seen nearly enough of him to know. So it really goes to what they think of Alec Boehm and how quickly they think he's going to be here.
Scott, real quick, is there a player that you think the Phillies can target via trade? You mentioned how the Red Sox got Chris Sale in a trade. They gave up Yohan Moncada, who has not developed into yet a game-changing player. Is there a guy that you think who's under contract and young that the Phillies can try to poach from an organization that needs to start over a little bit and get that kind of a deal? Maybe not of Chris Sale name, but somewhere, someone good.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I don't know. I mean, you think about the names that we were hearing around the trade deadline last year, Matthew Boyd in Detroit, and guys like that who are, Detroit's asking for a lot for that guy. And again, depending on who you talk to, some people think he's an emerging ace. Some people think he's a middle of the rotation guy, and that's what he's always going to be. So, that's the kind of team you're looking at, though. It's a team like Detroit that's got, that's not going to win before Matthew Boyd makes big money. So why not move him and try to get something? I mean, if you like Chris Archer, you could probably get him out of Pittsburgh. But I don't know if there's a Chris Sale out there. I don't think there is. And again, that's the kind of thing. It's interesting this early in the offseason at the GM meetings. That's the kind of thing that's going on right now. Teams are sort of trying to figure out what the trade market looks like. Everyone knows who's out there in free agency. but can you make a trade? I think the Chris Sale trade germinated from the GM meetings a couple of years ago. I think the Gene Segura trade kind of came about in conversations at the GM meetings last year. So we'll see if they can come out of this week with any kind of idea of what the trade market's going to look like. And I think that's going to be really interesting as they move forward into the offseason.
And remember, they went out via trade and got Segura and Real Muto last year, so keep an eye on the trade market. He's Scott Lauber, Philadelphia Inquirer, the Phillies, the offseason, and, of course, we'll keep an eye on that. Scott, we always appreciate the time, pal.
Sure, guys, anytime.
And he, like August, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline.